Brandon Calloway knelt on the hardwood floor of his kitchen, measuring tape in one hand and pencil tucked behind his ear. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he marked the final measurements for the new tile flooring. The renovation had been his weekend project for the past month, another improvement to the suburban Chicago home he and Marissa had purchased 5 years ago. He sat back on his heels, surveying the kitchen with a critical eye. The granite countertops he'd installed last year gleamed under the recessed lighting. The custom cabinets he'd built himself hung perfectly aligned. Everything in its place, everything earned through hard work and disciplined values that had guided him since his days in the Marines. Just the sink plumbing to check, then we can start laying tile tomorrow, he muttered to himself, sliding beneath the kitchen sink cabinet with a wrench. Brandon had always been methodical, preferring to do things himself rather than trust others to meet his standards. It was this attention to detail that had made him successful as an architect. His firm valued his precision, his clients appreciated his thoroughness, and his colleagues respected his unwavering work ethic. The front door opened and closed, followed by voices in the foyer. Brandon recognized Marissa's voice immediately, the slight pitch change she used when talking to someone she wanted to impress. The other voice belonged to Lauren, Marissa's younger sister. "Do you want something to drink?" Marissa asked, her voice growing louder as they approached the kitchen. "No, I can't stay long," Lauren replied. "I just dropped by to see how you're doing." Brandon was about to slide out from under the sink to greet them when Lauren's next question froze him in place. "Have you told him you're moving out next month?" There was a pause, the sound of a glass being placed on the counter, and then Marissa's laugh, light, dismissive, the laugh she used when discussing something she considered trivial. "No way. I need to secure my promotion first, then take half the accounts." Brandon's hands stilled on the pipe. His body tensed, but he didn't make a sound. Years of military training had taught him to control his reactions, to observe before acting. "You don't think he suspects anything?" Lauren asked, her voice lowered but still audible in the quiet house. "Brandon, please. He's too busy with his little home improvement projects to notice anything." Another dismissive laugh from Marissa. "Besides, he thinks everything is fine. I've been careful. What about Michael? Does he know you're planning to leave Brandon?" Brandon's grip tightened on the wrench. Michael. He knew the name, one of Marissa's colleagues at the financial firm where she worked as an executive. The one she mentioned too often, then not at all. "Michael's waiting for me to sort everything out," Marissa replied. "Once I get the promotion and secure my finances, we can be together officially." "And Brandon gets blindsided," Lauren said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. "It's business, not personal," Marissa replied coolly. "Brandon will survive. He always does. Besides, he's been distracted with work and his projects. We barely talk anymore." "That's cold, even for you, Rissa. It's practical. I put in 10 years with him. I deserve half of everything we've built." The sound of chairs scraping against the floor told Brandon they had moved to the dining table, their voices becoming more distant. He remained under the sink, his mind racing, yet somehow perfectly clear. 10 years. 10 years of building a life together, of supporting her career, of loving her through every challenge. And now it was business, not personal. Brandon completed his work on the pipes with mechanical precision, his body operating on autopilot while his mind processed what he'd just heard. When he finally emerged from beneath the sink, his face betrayed nothing of the storm raging within him. He stepped quietly to the kitchen entrance, observing Marissa and Lauren seated at the dining table, their backs to him, heads bent in conversation. "I should finish the kitchen," he announced, his voice steady. Both women startled, turning to face him. Marissa recovered quickly, her professional smile sliding into place. "Brandon, I didn't hear you come in. Lauren just stopped by to say hello." Marissa's eyes, the same deep brown that had once captivated him, revealed nothing. "Hello, Lauren." Brandon nodded, his tone cordial, his expression neutral. "I've been working on the sink. Almost done with the kitchen renovation." "It looks amazing," Lauren said, her eyes not quite meeting his. "You've always been so good at fixing things." "Yes," Brandon replied, allowing himself a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I've always been good at fixing things." Marissa stood, smoothing her tailored skirt. "I thought you'd be at the hardware store all afternoon." "Got everything I needed earlier," Brandon said. "I'll finish up here and clean, so we can have dinner later." "Actually, I have to head back to the office," Marissa replied, checking her watch. "The Peterson account needs attention before Monday." "The Peterson account," Brandon repeated. "Of course. Don't work too late." "I'll walk out with you, Lauren," Marissa said, gathering her purse and phone. "Brandon, don't wait up. This might take a while." He nodded, turning back to his tools, arranging them methodically on the counter as the women left the house. The front door closed, and Brandon stood alone in the kitchen he had renovated with his own hands. The wrench in his grip felt heavy. He placed it carefully on the counter, then leaned forward, palms flat against the cool granite. His reflection stared back at him from the newly installed stainless steel sink, eyes clear. Jaw set, a plan began to form. That night, while Marissa worked late at the office or wherever she actually was, Brandon sat in his home office, the blue glow of his computer screen illuminating his face as he systematically accessed their financial records. Joint checking accounts, savings accounts, investment portfolios, retirement funds, all of them open one by one like layers of an architectural blueprint. Brandon had always managed their finances, a responsibility Marissa had happily relinquished to focus on her career. Now, that trust would become his advantage, that he worked methodically, making notes, taking screenshots, downloading statements. A decade of financial history lay bare before him. He noticed patterns he'd overlooked before: unexplained expenses, cash withdrawals that Marissa had vaguely attributed to client dinners or office events. "Business, not personal," he murmured, echoing her words as he compiled the evidence of her deception. Brandon leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. The digital clock on his desk read 2:17 a.m. Marissa still wasn't home. His gaze drifted to the framed photograph on his desk, their wedding day, 10 years ago. Marissa in white, her smile radiant, her eyes looking into his with what he had believed was love. Brandon in his dress uniform, proud and certain they would build a life together. He turned the frame face down. Brandon had sacrificed for their marriage. He'd left the Marines earlier than planned because Marissa wanted stability. He'd chosen architecture over engineering because it would allow them to settle in Chicago, where her career opportunities were better. He'd supported her long hours, her frequent business trips, her networking events, all while designing their life together, brick by brick. And now she planned to tear it all down. His military training had taught him that emotion was the enemy of strategy. Anger, betrayal, hurt, these feelings would only cloud his judgment when clarity was essential. Brandon compartmentalized his pain, sealing it away to focus on the mission ahead. The front door opened and closed softly. Marissa was home. Brandon quickly closed the financial documents and opened a set of architectural plans he'd been working on for a client. Marissa appeared in the doorway of his office, her suit still crisp despite the late hour, her makeup perfect. Not a woman who had been working at a desk all night. "You're still up," she observed, leaning against the doorframe. "Deadline for the Westlake project," Brandon replied, not looking up from his computer. "How was the Peterson account?" "Challenging," she said after a slight pause. "But I think we've got it under control now." Brandon nodded, noting the faint scent of unfamiliar cologne that clung to her. "I'm glad. Don't stay up too late," Marissa said, already turning away. "You know how you get when you're exhausted." "I know exactly how I get," Brandon replied quietly. That he waited until he heard the bedroom door close before returning to his financial investigation. By dawn, he had cataloged every asset, mapped every account, and formulated the first phase of his counterattack. Marissa had declared war without firing a shot. Brandon would respond in kind. The next morning, Brandon prepared coffee and toast as usual. When Marissa entered the kitchen, dressed for her Saturday workout, he handed her a mug with a smile. "I thought I'd finish the flooring today," he said, sipping his coffee. "Should be done by evening." "That's nice," Marissa replied, checking something on her phone. "I've got spin class, then lunch with Jennifer. Might go shopping after." Jennifer, another lie. Jennifer was out of town. Brandon had overheard Marissa telling Lauren this just days ago. but he nodded as if he believed her. "Have fun," he said. "I'll be here, working on our home." Marissa barely looked up from her phone. "Thanks for the coffee." After she left, Brandon returned to his home office and made 3 phone calls. The first was to his personal attorney, scheduling a confidential meeting for Monday morning. The second was to a private investigator he had researched overnight. The third was to his bank, requesting a freeze on their joint credit cards due to suspicious activity. By noon, Brandon had moved 40% of their liquid assets into a separate account under his name alone, not enough to alert Marissa, but enough to secure his position. The remainder would have to wait until he had legal counsel that he then spent the afternoon installing the kitchen floor tiles, each one placed with perfect precision. The physical labor helped clear his mind, the repetitive motion allowing him to refine his strategy. Marissa returned home at 7, carrying shopping bags with designer labels. She stepped into the kitchen and paused, admiring the newly tiled floor. "It looks beautiful," she said, and for a moment, Brandon caught a glimpse of the woman he had married, appreciative, warm. But then she placed her bags on the counter and added, "This will definitely help the resale value." Resale value. She was already thinking about selling their home. "That's what I thought," Brandon replied, wiping his hands on a towel. "An investment in our future." Marissa smiled, unaware of the double meaning in his words. "Exactly. I'm going to take a shower before dinner." As she left the kitchen, Brandon watched her, this stranger he had loved for a decade. The pain threatened to surface, but he pushed it down. This was no longer about emotion. This was about justice. That night, lying beside Marissa in their bed, listening to her even breathing as she slept, Brandon stared at the ceiling and reminded himself of who he was, a Marine who had survived combat, an architect who created order from chaos, a man who had been betrayed but would not be broken. Sleep eluded him, but clarity did not. By morning, he knew exactly what needed to be done. Sunday passed with the appearance of normalcy. Brandon prepared breakfast, read the newspaper, and continued work on minor house projects. Marissa caught up on emails, made phone calls in hushed tones from their bedroom, and mentioned another late night at the office on Monday. "The promotion committee meets next week," she explained over a dinner Brandon had cooked. "I need to make sure everything is perfect." "The promotion means a lot to you," Brandon observed, pouring her a glass of wine. Marissa nodded, accepting the wine with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's what I've been working toward for years. Executive vice president would put me in the top tier of the firm." "And what happens after you get the promotion?" Brandon asked, his tone conversational. Something flickered across Marissa's face, caution, perhaps, or calculation. "More responsibility. More money." "Why do you ask?" Brandon shrugged, taking a sip of his own wine. "Just wondering how it might change our lives." "It won't change much," Marissa replied, her focus returning to her plate. "Just more security for our future." A future she didn't plan to share with him, Brandon thought, but he nodded as if her answer satisfied him. "I've always admired your ambition," he said, meaning it despite everything. Marissa was formidable in her professional life, focused, intelligent, relentless when pursuing a goal. Once, he had been proud to support her rise. Now, he would use her ambition against her. "You've always been supportive," Marissa acknowledged, briefly meeting his eyes. Was there guilt there? Regret? Or just impatience to be done with the charade? "That's what marriage is about," Brandon replied. "Supporting each other's dreams." Marissa's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then stood abruptly. "I need to take this. It's work." Brandon watched her hurry from the dining room. Phone pressed to her ear, voice dropping as she closed herself in her home office. Michael, most likely. The man who would replace him in Marissa's carefully planned future. He cleared the dinner plates, washed them by hand, although they had a dishwasher, and prepared Marissa's favorite dessert, chocolate mousse with fresh raspberries. When she emerged from her office 20 minutes later, the dessert waited on the dining table alongside a fresh glass of wine. "Sorry about that," she said, resuming her seat. "The Davis portfolio is causing headaches." "I understand," Brandon said, pushing the dessert toward her. "You've been working hard. You deserve something sweet." Marissa's eyebrows rose slightly at the unexpected gesture. "Thank you." This looks delicious. I know it's your favorite. They ate in silence for a few moments. Marissa seemingly lost in thought, Brandon observing her with newfound clarity. I've been thinking, he said finally, breaking the silence. You're right about needing more security for our future. I'm going to reallocate some of our investments this week. Move things to more stable options. Oh, Marissa looked up from her dessert. Like what? Nothing dramatic, Brandon assured her. Just some protective measures. I'll handle it. You focus on your promotion. All right, she agreed, clearly relieved to avoid a detailed financial discussion. I trust you with that stuff. Trust. The word hung between them, loaded with irony that only Brandon recognized. That's good to know, he said softly. Monday morning arrived, and with it, the beginning of Brandon's counteroffensive. He rose early, dressed in one of his best suits, and prepared coffee for himself and Marissa. You look nice, Marissa commented as she entered the kitchen, already dressed in a sharp business suit herself. Meeting with clients today? Something like that, Brandon replied, handing her a travel mug. And you? Big day at the office. Every day is big until the promotion committee makes their decision, she said, checking her appearance in the reflection of the microwave door. I probably won't be home until late again. I understand, Brandon said, and for the first time since overhearing her conversation with Lauren, he felt a flicker of something like satisfaction. Good luck today. Marissa paused at his tone, studying him briefly before offering a quick smile. Thanks. You too, with your meetings. They left the house separately, Marissa in her luxury sedan, Brandon in his more practical SUV. But while Marissa headed to her financial firm downtown, Brandon drove to a nondescript office building in a different part of the city. His meeting with the attorney was brief but productive. Brandon laid out the facts without emotion. His decade-long marriage, the joint assets, and the evidence of Marissa's intention to leave him after securing her promotion. She hasn't actually filed for divorce yet? The attorney asked, making notes. No, Brandon confirmed. But she's planning to blindside me with it next month, after her promotion is secured. The attorney nodded, understanding the implications. And you want to be prepared. I want to be more than prepared, Brandon clarified. I want to ensure that when she makes her move, I'm already 10 steps ahead. They discussed options, legal strategies, and the careful balance Brandon would need to maintain. Acting too aggressively too soon could alert Marissa. Moving too slowly could leave him vulnerable. The key, the attorney advised, is timing and documentation. Gather evidence, secure your individual assets, and maintain the appearance of normalcy until we're ready to act. Brandon nodded. Timing and documentation. Discipline and strategy. The principles that had guided his military career would now guide his defense of what was rightfully his. From the attorney's office, Brandon went directly to meet with a private investigator, a former police detective named Reynolds who came highly recommended for his discretion and thoroughness. I need information, Brandon explained after outlining the situation. Concrete evidence of her relationship with this man, Michael. Bank statements showing any hidden accounts she might have. Documentation of her plans. Reynolds nodded, professional and unperturbed. Discreet surveillance, financial investigation, electronic communications, if accessible. It'll take time, and it won't be cheap. Time and money are not concerns, Brandon replied. Results are. By the time Brandon returned home that evening, he had set in motion the first phase of his plan. Marissa, as expected, was still at work or with Michael. Brandon used the opportunity to search their home office, looking for any documents or evidence Marissa might have left behind in the back of her desk drawer. Beneath a stack of professional journals, he found a leather portfolio containing handwritten notes about potential apartments in an upscale neighborhood across town. Property listings circled in red pen. Notes about proximity to Michael's condo. Brandon photographed everything, then replaced it exactly as he had found it. Evidence gathered, pieces moving into position. When Marissa finally came home at 11, Brandon was in bed, pretending to sleep. She moved quietly around the bedroom, changing into her night clothes, performing her nightly routine. He listened to the familiar sounds, remembering when they had brought him comfort. Now, they were just the movements of an opponent who didn't know the battle had already begun. The next few days followed a similar pattern. Brandon maintained the facade of the devoted husband while systematically preparing for war. He visited their bank during his lunch break on Tuesday, changing the passwords and access codes for their joint accounts. He spoke with his firm's HR department about updating his benefits information. He consulted with a financial advisor about protecting his personal assets. Each evening, he prepared dinner, asked about Marissa's day, and listened attentively as she detailed her progress toward the promotion. Each night, he lay beside her in bed, planning his next move while she slept unaware. Friday, Reynolds the investigator had delivered his first report. Photographs of Marissa and Michael entering his downtown condo, time-stamped during hours she had claimed to be working late. Bank statements showing a separate account Marissa had opened 6 months earlier, into which she had been depositing small amounts from her personal funds. Text messages recovered from a cloud backup, detailing plans and promises between the lovers. Brandon reviewed everything with the cold detachment of a strategist analyzing intelligence reports. Each piece of evidence was a weapon in his arsenal, to be deployed at the perfect moment for maximum effect. That evening, Marissa announced she would be working through the weekend on a special project for the promotion committee. They've asked each candidate to prepare a strategic vision presentation. She explained over the takeout dinner Brandon had ordered. It's basically the final test before they make their decision. Sounds important, Brandon nodded, appearing supportive. You should focus entirely on that. I can handle things here. Marissa smiled, relieved by his understanding. Thanks. I'll probably stay at a hotel downtown to avoid the commute. The presentation is Monday morning. A hotel downtown, or Michael's condo. It didn't matter anymore. Brandon simply nodded, raising his glass in a toast. To your success, he said, meeting her eyes steadily. May you get exactly what you deserve. Marissa touched her glass to his, unaware of the double meaning in his words. Thank you, Brandon. I couldn't have come this far without your support. The irony was almost enough to make him laugh, but Brandon maintained his composure. I've always believed in giving my all to the things that matter. After dinner, he helped Marissa pack a small suitcase for her weekend at the hotel, offering suggestions about which outfits might impress the promotion committee, which shoes would be most comfortable for long hours of preparation. When she left, wheeling her suitcase behind her, Brandon stood in the doorway of their home, waving goodbye like the supportive husband she believed him to be. As her car disappeared down the street, his smile faded, replaced by a look of cold determination. The weekend stretched before him 2 days of uninterrupted time to execute the next phase of his plan. 2 days to ensure that Marissa's world would begin to unravel precisely when she thought she was about to win. Brandon closed the door, turned back to the empty house, and got to work. Saturday morning dawned clear and cold, typical for Chicago in late October. Brandon rose early, made coffee, and settled at his desk with his laptop. Today would be about finances, cutting off Marissa's access to their joint resources while preserving his own position. His attorney had provided clear guidance on what actions were legally permissible before an official separation. Brandon had listened carefully, then pushed for more aggressive options. He wasn't interested in playing defense. The first step was the trust. Brandon had already established a revocable living trust for estate planning purposes years earlier, with both himself and Marissa as beneficiaries. Now, he logged into his account with their wealth management firm and initiated a transfer of assets from their joint investment accounts into the trust, simultaneously removing Marissa as a beneficiary. Legal? Technically not. Reversible if challenged in court? Yes. But by the time Marissa discovered what he'd done and took legal action to reverse it, Brandon would have executed the rest of his plan. Next came the credit cards. Brandon had already frozen their joint cards due to suspicious activity, a temporary measure that wouldn't raise immediate alarms. Now, he logged into each account and formally removed Marissa as an authorized user, simultaneously ordering new cards for himself with different account numbers that he worked methodically, taking breaks only to refill his coffee cup or stretch his legs. By noon, he had altered the access permissions on their brokerage accounts, changed the PINs on their bank accounts, and rerouted investment dividends to his personal account. Brandon paused, considering his next move. the house their most valuable joint asset. He couldn't transfer ownership without Marissa's signature, but he could ensure she couldn't sell it out from under him. A quick call to his attorney confirmed his options. By 2 o'clock, Brandon had filed notice of interest with the county recorder's office, effectively preventing any sale or refinancing without his explicit consent. His phone buzzed with a text from Marissa, presentation coming together. "How's your day?" Brandon stared at the message, imagining her typing it from Michael's bed, maintaining the charade of normalcy while plotting to destroy the life they had built together. "Quiet day at home," he replied. "Just catching up on some things around the house. Good luck with the presentation." 3 dots appeared, indicating she was typing a response, then vanished. A minute later, "Thanks. Might be hard to reach tomorrow." In deep focus mode. "I understand," Brandon texted back. "Take all the time you need." He set the phone down, a humorless smile crossing his face. Deep focus mode. With Michael, no doubt. Let her enjoy these last moments of perceived control. By Monday, her world would begin to shift beneath her feet. Brandon's next call was to their insurance agent. He removed Marissa as a beneficiary on his life insurance policy, replacing her with a cousin who had been like a brother to him during their childhood. He then canceled the premium payments on Marissa's car insurance, a small gesture, but one that would create an inconvenience when she was pulled over for a routine traffic stop or attempted to renew her registration. By evening, Brandon had systematically dismantled the financial infrastructure that had supported Marissa's comfortable life. Each change was documented, each action calculated for maximum impact with minimal legal exposure. He ordered dinner from their favorite Italian restaurant, a meal for one, and ate at the dining table, surrounded by the home he had built, renovated, and maintained while Marissa focused on her career. The career she would use to finance her new life with Michael after leaving Brandon behind. Not anymore. His phone rang. Reynolds, the investigator. "Mr. Calloway." Reynolds' gravelly voice came through the speaker. "You asked me to track financial movements on your wife's separate account." Brandon sat straighter. "What did you find?" "A transfer came through today. $50,000 from your joint brokerage account to her private account, executed this morning." Brandon's jaw tightened. She was already moving money, preparing for her exit by siphoning their joint assets. "Can you send me the documentation?" he asked, his voice calm despite the rage building inside him. "Already in your encrypted email," Reynolds confirmed. "What's your next move?" Brandon considered his options. The transfer was significant but not catastrophic. More importantly, it gave him justification for the financial maneuvers he had already executed today. "Continue monitoring," he instructed. "I want to know about every transaction, every meeting, every phone call between now and Monday, especially anything related to her firm or this promotion she's pursuing." "Understood," Reynolds replied. "I'll be in touch." After hanging up, Brandon accessed his encrypted email and downloaded the evidence Reynolds had sent. Marissa's $50,000 transfer was there in black and white, dated that morning, authorized remotely. Not technically illegal since they were still married, but clearly executed with the intention of building her escape fund. Brandon saved the documentation to a secure folder, adding it to his growing collection of evidence. Then he poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey, not to dull the pain, but to celebrate the clarity of his purpose. Sunday brought more of the same methodical dismantling of their shared financial life. Brandon focused on the details. Automatic payments for utilities were rerouted to his personal account. Subscriptions were transferred solely to his name. Airline miles accumulated through their joint credit card were redeemed into his individual frequent flyer account. Each action alone was minor, almost trivial. Together, they formed a comprehensive strategy to isolate Marissa financially while preserving Brandon's access to the resources they had built together. By Sunday evening, with Marissa due to return the following night after her presentation to the promotion committee, Brandon had executed nearly every financial maneuver available to him without crossing into clearly illegal territory. He sat in his home office, reviewing his checklist. Financial assets secured. Physical evidence documented. Legal counsel engaged. All that remained was to target the thing Marissa valued most. Her career advancement. Monday morning arrived with a sense of anticipation. Brandon dressed in one of his best suits, ate a light breakfast, and drove to his architectural firm's offices downtown. Today would be a day of professional focus both on his own work and on disrupting Marissa's. At his desk, between client meetings and project reviews, Brandon composed an email. The recipient was the compliance department at Marissa's financial firm, with copies to the general counsel and the chair of the board of directors. The sender was an anonymous email address created specifically for this purpose. The content was carefully crafted, not accusations, but concerns. Concerns about potential ethical irregularities in certain client account management practices. Concerns specifically about the department Marissa headed, with just enough detail to seem credible without being directly traceable to him. Brandon read the email 3 times, checking for any mistakes or tells that might reveal his identity. Satisfied, he sent it through a VPN, then deleted the email account immediately afterward. A small ripple in Marissa's corporate world, just enough to cause questions on the very day she was presenting to the promotion committee, just enough to plant a seed of doubt among those who would decide her professional fate. Tea lunch. Brandon met with a colleague who had once worked at Marissa's firm before joining his architectural practice. Robert, Brandon began casually as they ate at a restaurant near their office. You still have contacts at Meridian Financial, right? Robert nodded, taking a bite of his sandwich. A few. Why do you ask? Just curious about their promotion process, Brandon replied. Marissa's up for executive VP, and I was wondering how those decisions typically get made. Robert shrugged. Committee review. Usually, the candidate presents their vision, answers questions. Then the committee votes, but the CEO has final say. And if there were concerns about a candidate, ethical concerns, for instance, Robert's eyebrows rose slightly. That would complicate things. Meridian is obsessive about their reputation. Even a hint of impropriety would trigger an internal review. Why? Is there something going on with Marissa's promotion? Brandon shook his head, offering a reassuring smile. No, nothing like that. Just trying to understand the stakes. She's been working toward this for years. Robert nodded, apparently satisfied with the explanation. Well, I hope she gets it. She's certainly put in the time. Yes, Brandon agreed, taking a sip of water. She certainly has. After lunch, Brandon returned to his office and immersed himself in his work, designing a sustainable office complex for a major client. The familiar process of creation, drafting plans, solving problems, building something meant to last steadied him. While Marissa was destroying their marriage, he was creating something of value. His phone buzzed with a text from Reynolds. Meeting concluded at 11:30. Subject appeared distressed upon exit. Currently at downtown restaurant with male companion identified as Michael Layton. Brandon read the message twice. Distressed. The promotion committee meeting hadn't gone as planned then. The anonymous email had found its mark, but he didn't reply to Reynolds. Instead, he focused on his work with renewed energy, losing himself in the precision and certainty of architectural design until evening fell and it was time to return home. Marissa would be back tonight. The first confrontation since he had discovered her betrayal was imminent. Brandon drove home slowly, mentally preparing for the performance he would deliver the supportive husband, eager to hear about her presentation, unaware of her distress or its cause. The house was still empty when he arrived. Brandon changed from his work clothes into casual pants and a sweater, then prepared a simple dinner pasta with a sauce from scratch, one of Marissa's favorites. He opened a bottle of wine, set the table for 2, and waited. Marissa arrived at 8, wheeling her suitcase into the foyer with less energy than usual. Brandon emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel, a smile of welcome on his face. There she is, he said warmly. How did it go? Marissa set down her purse, fatigue evident in the slump of her shoulders. It was challenging. There were some unexpected questions. About your strategic vision, Brandon asked innocently. No, Marissa's voice tightened. About some anonymous complaint the compliance department received this morning. Ridiculous allegations about account management practices. Brandon's expression shifted to one of concern. That sounds serious. What kind of allegations? Nothing specific, Marissa said, moving past him toward the kitchen. Just vague insinuations about ethical corners being cut. Completely unfounded, but enough to distract the committee from my actual presentation. Brandon followed her, watching as she poured herself a glass of the wine he had opened. That's terrible timing. Who would do something like that? Marissa took a long drink before answering. I have my suspicions. There's another VP who's up for the same promotion. This has his fingerprints all over it. Will it affect the committee's decision? Brandon asked, returning to the stove to serve the pasta. It shouldn't, Marissa replied, but uncertainty colored her voice. They've delayed the announcement pending a preliminary review by compliance, but the chairman assured me it's just a formality. Brandon nodded sympathetically as he placed a plate of pasta in front of her. I'm sure it will work out. They know your value to the firm. Marissa offered a tired smile. Thanks. This looks delicious. They ate dinner, Brandon asking appropriate questions about her weekend of preparation, Marissa providing details that Brandon knew were partially fabricated to hide her time with Michael. He played his role perfectly. Interested, supportive, unaware of her deception or his own countermeasures. After dinner, as Marissa unpacked her suitcase in her bedroom, Brandon settled in the living room with his laptop, checking his secure email for updates from Reynolds or his attorney. A message from Reynolds contained photographs of Marissa and Michael together at the restaurant after her presentation, her body language clearly conveying distress, his hand on hers in a gesture of comfort or reassurance. Brandon stored the images in his secure folder, adding them to the growing collection of evidence. Then he closed his laptop as Marissa entered the living room, now changed into comfortable clothes, her hair loose around her shoulders. I think I'll turn in early, she said, stifling a yawn. It's been an exhausting few days. Brandon nodded understandingly. Get some rest. I'm sure tomorrow will bring better news. I hope so, Marissa replied, hesitating in the doorway. Brandon, thank you for being so supportive. I know I've been distant lately, with all the pressure at work. The sincerity in her voice nearly broke through Brandon's composed exterior. For a moment, he almost believed she meant it, that there was still something real between them, something worth salvaging. Then he remembered her words to Lauren. No way. I need to secure my promotion first, then take half the accounts. That's what marriage is about, he replied, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Being there for each other, no matter what. Marissa nodded, then turned toward the bedroom. Good night. Good night, Marissa, Brandon replied softly. He remained in the living room long after she had gone to bed, staring at the dark screen of his laptop, thinking about the next phase of his plan. The seed of doubt had been planted at Marissa's firm. Now it was time to escalate, to ensure that her professional world would be as unstable as her personal one was about to become. Brandon opened his laptop again and began composing a new email, this one to a financial journalist known for investigating ethical issues in the banking industry. The story would be vague but compelling. Concerns about client account management at Meridian Financial, whispers of impropriety, an internal investigation being quietly conducted, no names, no specific allegations that could be traced back to him or proven false. Just enough to cause the journalist to start asking questions, making phone calls, requesting comments from Meridian's public relations department. Just enough to ensure that Marissa's promotion remained in limbo while the firm dealt with unwanted media attention. Brandon sent the email, then closed his laptop with a sense of grim satisfaction. Tomorrow would bring new developments, new opportunities to tighten the noose around Marissa's carefully constructed plans. Before going to bed, he checked on Marissa. She was asleep, her face peaceful in the dim light filtering through the curtains. Brandon stood in the doorway, watching her breathe, remembering when the sight had filled him with love. Now, he felt nothing but resolve. She had made her choice. Now she would face the consequences. Tuesday morning brought rain to Chicago, heavy drops pattering against the windows as Brandon and Marissa prepared for their respective days. Brandon noticed the tension in Marissa's movements as she dressed in another impeccable suit, applied her makeup with extra care, checked her phone repeatedly. Any news from the committee? He asked, adjusting his tie in the bathroom mirror beside her. Marissa shook her head, applying a final touch of lipstick. Not yet. The chairman said they'd reach out today, once compliance gives them the all clear. I'm sure it will be fine, Brandon assured her, his tone confident. Your record speaks for itself. Marissa's phone buzzed. She checked it, frowning slightly at whatever message she had received. Everything okay? Brandon asked, watching her reflection in the mirror. Fine, she replied curtly. Just need to handle something before my first meeting. They drove to work separately. As usual, Brandon headed to his firm, where he spent the morning in productive meetings with clients, his external demeanor betraying nothing of his internal focus on dismantling Marissa's plans. He could tea lunch. He checked his secure email. Reynolds had sent an update. Marissa had spent the morning in meetings with Meridian's compliance department and human resources. The journalist Brandon had contacted had reached out to Meridian's PR department, requesting comment on rumors of an internal investigation. The wheels were in motion. Marissa's professional world was beginning to experience the same instability she had planned to introduce into Brandon's life. That afternoon, Brandon received a call from his attorney. Mr. Calloway, the attorney began, I wanted to update you on our findings regarding your wife's separate financial accounts. Go ahead, Brandon replied, closing his office door for privacy. We've confirmed 3 accounts established within the last year, totaling approximately $87,000. Based on the documentation you provided, most of these funds appear to have been transferred from your joint accounts in small amounts over time. Brandon processed this information. $87,000 is a significant sum, but less than 5% of their total joint assets. Marissa had been cautious, moving amounts small enough to avoid triggering his attention. Is there any legal recourse to recover these funds? He asked. Not until divorce proceedings are initiated, the attorney explained. At that point, we can include these accounts in the asset disclosure process. However, given what you've told me about our plans, I would advise against tipping your hand by filing first. Agreed, Brandon said. Let her make the first official move. In the meantime, I'll continue securing our other assets. Just be careful, the attorney warned. There's a fine line between protecting yourself and actions a court might view as financial misconduct. Brandon nodded, though the attorney couldn't see him through the phone. I understand the risks. Thank you for the update. After ending the call, Brandon checked his calendar. Marissa had mentioned possibly traveling next week ostensibly for work, but most likely to meet with a divorce lawyer in another city, one who wouldn't be recognized by any of their mutual acquaintances. It was time to set another trap. That evening, Brandon arrived home before Marissa. He prepared a simple dinner, then settled at the dining table with his laptop, purposefully positioned so the screen would be visible to anyone entering the room. On screen, he opened his email and began composing a message to a fictional woman named Elena. The content was ambiguous but suggestive mentions of their last meeting, gratitude for her understanding and support, plans to continue their discussion soon. Brandon heard Marissa's car pull into the driveway. He left the email open on his screen, but moved to the kitchen, busying himself with dinner preparations. The front door opened and closed, followed by the sound of Marissa's heels on the hardwood floor. Brandon, she called out. In the kitchen, he replied. Dinner's almost ready. Marissa appeared in the doorway, still in her work attire, her expression tight with tension. I'm not hungry. It's been a difficult day. Brandon turned from the stove, concern on his face. What happened? The promotion announcement has been officially delayed, she said, dropping her purse on the counter with unusual carelessness. Apparently, some journalist is asking questions about our department's practices. The firm wants to ensure there are no PR issues before making any executive announcements. I'm sorry to hear that, Brandon said, meaning it in a way Marissa couldn't possibly understand. Can I get you a drink instead of dinner? Marissa nodded, moving toward the dining room. Wine would be great. I need to check some emails first. Brandon smiled to himself as he opened a bottle of red wine. 3, 2, 1, Brandon. Marissa's voice came from the dining room, a new note in it. Who is Elena? Brandon carried 2 glasses of wine into the dining room, finding Marissa standing beside his laptop, staring at the email draft he had purposefully left open. Oh, he said, setting down the wine glasses and moving to close the laptop. Just a new client. Potential residential project. Marissa's eyes narrowed slightly. You usually don't handle residential projects. The firm is expanding that division, Brandon explained smoothly. Elena was referred by one of our commercial clients. High-end custom home, good commission potential. He closed the laptop, sliding it aside as if the matter were closed. How serious is this delay with your promotion? The distraction worked partially. Marissa accepted the glass of wine he offered, but her eyes lingered on the closed laptop for a moment before returning to him. The chairman says it's just procedural, but I'm concerned, she admitted, taking a large sip of wine. The timing couldn't be worse. These things have a way of working themselves out, Brandon replied, taking a seat at the table. Your record at Meridian speaks for itself. Marissa nodded, but doubt clouded her features. She glanced again at Brandon's laptop before changing the subject. I might need to travel next week for work, she said, watching his reaction. The Davis portfolio needs attention at their headquarters in Boston. Boston, a convenient choice far enough from Chicago to ensure privacy, large enough to have plenty of high-quality divorce attorneys. How long would you be gone? Brandon asked, keeping his tone casual. Just 2 nights, maybe 3, Marissa replied. I'll know more in a day or 2. Brandon nodded, understanding. Well, keep me posted. I might need to go to New York for a project meeting myself. This was a lie, there was no New York meeting. But the suggestion that he might also be traveling served 2 purposes. It reinforced his fabricated relationship with Elena, and it provided a reason for him to be unavailable if Marissa attempted to check on his whereabouts while she was in Boston. New York? Marissa asked, her wine glass pausing halfway to her lips. For the Westlake project? No, something new, Brandon replied vaguely, still in the preliminary discussion phase. Marissa studied him for a moment, clearly trying to decide whether to press for more information. Finally, she simply nodded and finished her wine. I think I'll skip dinner and take a bath, she said, rising from the table. It's been a long day. Of course, Brandon replied. Take some time for yourself. I'll be here if you need anything. As Marissa left the dining room, Brandon observed the tension in her shoulders, the slight hesitation in her step. She was rattled by the delay in her promotion, by the mysterious Elena, by the suggestion that Brandon might have secrets of his own good. Let her experience a fraction of the uncertainty she had planned to inflict on him. Later that night, Brandon checked his secure email one last time before bed. Reynolds had sent a brief update. Marissa had made 3 phone calls after returning home, 1 to Michael, 1 to her sister Lauren, and 1 to a law firm in Boston specializing in high-net-worth divorces. The trap had worked. Marissa was accelerating her plans, driven by uncertainty and the fear that Brandon might have someone else, that her carefully constructed exit strategy might be compromised. Brandon closed his laptop and prepared for bed, knowing that Marissa was already asleep or pretending to be in their bedroom. Tomorrow would bring new developments, new opportunities to tighten the noose. As he lay in bed beside his wife, listening to her measured breathing, Brandon felt no regret for his actions. Marissa had declared war when she plotted to leave him, to take half of everything they had built together, to blindside him after securing her promotion. She had underestimated him, a mistake she would soon regret. The next few days passed in a dance of measured deception. Marissa confirmed her trip to Boston, scheduled for the following Monday through Wednesday. Brandon expressed appropriate support, offering to drive her to the airport, which she declined in favor of a car service. Meanwhile, Brandon continued his systematic dismantling of their shared financial infrastructure, careful to leave no evidence that would alert Marissa before her trip to Boston. He maintained the facade of normalcy, preparing meals, discussing their days, even watching television together in the evenings. But beneath the surface, both were preparing for battle. Marissa made hushed phone calls from her home office or the backyard. Brandon received regular updates from Reynolds and his attorney, building his case, strengthening his position. By Sunday night, the eve of Marissa's departure for Boston, the tension between them was almost palpable, though neither acknowledged it openly. They moved around each other with practiced politeness, like dancers performing familiar steps without music. I've packed your travel toiletry bag, Brandon said, handing Marissa the leather case they had purchased during a trip to Italy years earlier. And I put a protein bar in your purse for the flight. Marissa accepted the bag, genuine surprise flickering across her face at his thoughtfulness. Thank you. That was nice of you. It's nothing, Brandon replied with a small smile. Just want you to have a smooth trip. Guilt briefly shadowed Marissa's features, or was it regret? The emotion passed quickly, replaced by her usual composed expression. I appreciate it, she said formally. I should get some sleep. Early flight tomorrow. Brandon nodded. Of course. I'll try not to wake you when I get up for my run. They went through their nightly routines, Marissa in the master bathroom, Brandon in the guest bath to give her space. When Brandon finally entered the bedroom, Marissa was already in bed, her back to his side, the line of her body rigid beneath the covers. Brandon slipped into bed quietly, maintaining the physical distance that had grown between them in recent months. Good night, Marissa. Good night, she replied, her voice neutral. Neither of them slept well that night, each aware of the other's wakefulness, each lost in their own thoughts about the coming days. When Brandon's alarm went off for his morning run, Marissa was already awake, staring at the ceiling. Sorry, Brandon said, silencing the alarm. Didn't mean to disturb you. It's fine, Marissa replied, sitting up. I should get ready anyway. They moved around each other in the morning routine they had perfected over years of marriage, now hollow and mechanical. Brandon returned from his run to find Marissa fully dressed, her suitcase by the door, checking last-minute emails on her phone. All set? He asked, pouring himself a glass of water. Marissa nodded, not looking up from her phone. Car service will be here in 20 minutes. Want some coffee before you go? No, thanks. I'll get some at the airport. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken truths and carefully constructed lies. Finally, Marissa put her phone in her purse and looked up at Brandon. I should be back Wednesday evening, she said, unless things take longer than expected. No problem, Brandon replied. Take whatever time you need. I might be in New York myself by then, depending on how some meetings go today. Marissa's eyes narrowed slightly at the reminder of his own potential travel plans. Right, your new project. Just preliminary discussions, Brandon said with a casual shrug. Might not amount to anything. Before Marissa could respond, her phone buzzed with a notification from the car service. My ride is here. Brandon nodded. Have a safe trip. Good luck with the Davis portfolio. Marissa hesitated, then surprised him by stepping forward and placing a light kiss on his cheek. Thank you. I'll text when I land. Brandon watched from the doorway as she wheeled her suitcase to the waiting car, her posture perfect, her movements graceful even in retreat. As the car pulled away, he closed the door and leaned against it, a cold smile forming on his lips. Marissa was off to Boston to consult with divorce attorneys, believing she still held the advantage, still controlled the narrative. She had no idea what awaited her when she returned. Brandon moved to his home office and opened his secure email. It was time to execute the final phase of his plan, the decisive strikes that would ensure Marissa returned to a world fundamentally different from the one she had left. Monday passed in a blur of purposeful activity for Brandon. After confirming that Marissa's flight had departed on time, he initiated the final phase of his financial strategy, transferring the remaining joint assets into his protected accounts. Documenting each transaction meticulously for the inevitable legal battle to come. By noon, he had secured nearly 80% of their liquid assets, leaving just enough in the joint accounts to avoid immediate suspicion if Marissa happened to check her banking app while in Boston. The transfers were timed to process fully by Wednesday morning. Just before her scheduled return mid-afternoon, Brandon received a call from Reynolds. Mr. Calloway, the investigator's gravelly voice came through the speaker. I thought you'd want to know your wife's firm is dealing with some significant media attention today. Brandon leaned back in his chair, a smile tugging at his lips. Tell me, the financial journalist you mentioned, she published a piece this morning about potential ethical concerns at Meridian Financial. Nothing specific, mostly industry gossip, but she referenced an internal investigation and delayed executive promotions. How unfortunate, Brandon replied, his tone neutral despite his satisfaction. Any mention of specific departments or individuals? No names, Reynolds confirmed. But the article specifically mentioned the asset management division, which is Marissa's department, Brandon finished. Has there been any reaction from Meridian? Standard corporate statement about taking all ethical concerns seriously, commitment to transparency, the usual damage control. But my contact inside says it's causing a panic among senior management. All executive decisions are on hold until further notice. Brandon nodded, though Reynolds couldn't see him through the phone. Keep monitoring the situation. I want to know if Marissa attempts to return early from Boston. Will do, Reynolds agreed. Anything else? Yes, Brandon said after a moment's consideration. I need eyes on Michael Layton. If Marissa contacts him for Boston, I want to know about it. Already on it, Reynolds assured him. I'll update you with any developments. After ending the call, Brandon checked his email. Among the work-related messages was one from Marissa, sent from the Boston airport. Landed safely. Meeting starts in an hour. We'll update later. Brandon didn't reply. Let her wonder whether he was busy with Elena or simply unconcerned with her whereabouts. Either way, the uncertainty would gnaw at her a small taste of what she had planned to inflict on him. The rest of Monday passed according to Brandon's meticulous plan. He contacted the HR department at his architectural firm, removing Marissa as his emergency contact and beneficiary on his work benefits. He spoke with their insurance agent, finalizing the changes to their policies that he had initiated over the weekend. By evening, Brandon had effectively severed every financial and legal tie that bound him to Marissa, with the exception of their marriage itself. That final tie would be cut by her own hand when she filed for divorce, a filing that would now occur under circumstances very different from those she had planned. Tuesday morning brought a text from Marissa, meetings running long. My need to stay through Thursday. Brandon smiled at the transparent lie. Her meetings with divorce attorneys were clearly productive. She was extending her stay to finalize her strategy before returning to execute it. No problem, he texted back. My New York meetings confirmed for Thursday anyway. Another lie to counter hers. There were no New York meetings, just as there were no Boston client meetings. Just two people who had once loved each other, now engaged in mutual deception. Brandon spent Tuesday at his firm, focusing on actual client work to maintain the appearance of normalcy among his colleagues. But during lunch, he made a crucial phone call to the chairman of the promotion committee at Meridian Financial. Brandon had never met the man, but he had researched him thoroughly. Harvard Business School graduate, 20 years at Meridian, reputation for ethical leadership and zero tolerance for impropriety. Mr. Harrington, Brandon began when the call connected. My name is Brandon Calloway. I apologize for contacting you directly, but it concerns a matter of some delicacy involving Meridian Financial. There was a pause before Harrington responded, his tone cautious. How can I help you, Mr. Calloway? I understand you're currently reviewing candidates for an executive vice president position, Brandon continued, including my wife, Marissa Calloway. I'm not at liberty to discuss internal promotion decisions, Mr. Calloway, Harrington replied stiffly. I understand, Brandon assured him. I'm not calling about the promotion itself. I'm calling because I have information that might be relevant to your evaluation process. Another pause, longer this time. What kind of information? Financial irregularities, Brandon said, choosing his words carefully. Specifically, undisclosed accounts and transactions that might not align with Meridian's ethical standards for its executives. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Finally, Harrington spoke, his voice now sharp with attention. I think you should elaborate, Mr. Calloway. Brandon did, providing carefully selected details about Marissa's hidden accounts, her relationship with Michael Layton, also a Meridian employee, though in a different department, and her plans to leave the marriage immediately after securing her promotion. He presented the information not as an angry husband, but as a concerned financial professional who understood the importance of ethical conduct in the industry. He offered to provide documentation, bank statements, text messages, photographs to support his claims. By the end of the 20-minute conversation, Harrington's tone had shifted from skepticism to grave concern. I appreciate you bringing this to my attention, Mr. Calloway, Harrington said finally. Rest assured, we take these matters very seriously at Meridian. I understand this puts you in a difficult position, Brandon replied, maintaining his professional demeanor. I wouldn't have called if I didn't think it was important to Meridian's reputation and governance. Yes, well, Harrington cleared his throat. We'll need to review the information you've provided and conduct our own investigation, of course. Of course, Brandon agreed. I'm available if you need any additional information. After ending the call, Brandon sat at his desk, a sense of grim satisfaction settling over him. The seed of doubt he had planted with his anonymous email had now grown into something much more substantial, a direct allegation of ethical misconduct from a credible source. Marissa's promotion was no longer merely delayed. It was almost certainly dead. Wednesday morning dawned clear and crisp in Chicago. Brandon woke early, checked his secure email for updates from Reynolds, and confirmed that the final financial transfers had processed successfully. Nearly 90% of their joint assets were now under his exclusive control, protected by legal structures his attorney had helped establish. Reynolds reported that Marissa had spent Tuesday in meetings with 2 different law firms in Boston, followed by dinner alone in her hotel room. She had made several calls to Michael, her sister Lauren, and most significantly, to her direct supervisor at Meridian. That last call interested Brandon most. Had the supervisor informed Marissa about Brandon's conversation with Harrington? About the investigation that was surely now underway? The timing suggested it was possible that Brandon's phone buzzed with a text from Marissa, changing flight to early afternoon. Should be home by 5 p.m., so she was cutting her trip short. Interesting. Brandon texted back, safe travels. Might be in late meetings. No mention of New York. No need to maintain that particular fiction any longer. Events were moving toward their inevitable conclusion now. Brandon spent the morning at his firm, focusing on his work with unusual intensity, channeling his nervous energy into productive output. At lunch, he received an email from Reynolds containing a bombshell, a screenshot of an email sent to all Meridian Financial employees that morning. The email announced a temporary leadership change in the asset management division, effective immediately. Marissa's name was not mentioned directly, but the implication was clear. She had been removed from her position pending an internal investigation. Brandon forwarded the screenshot to his attorney with a brief note. Developments at M's firm. Expect accelerated timeline. The attorney's response came quickly. Understood. All preparations in place. Recommend maintaining residence when she returns. Witness advantage. Brandon agreed with the strategy. When Marissa returned home to confront him, as she inevitably would once she discovered what he had done, it would be best to have the conversation on his territory. With no chance for her to claim he had abandoned the marriage. At 3 o'clock, Brandon left his office, telling colleagues he needed to work from home for the remainder of the day. He drove home slowly, rehearsing what he would say when Marissa arrived, how he would respond to her anger, her accusations, her threats, that he was ready. More than ready. He had been preparing for this confrontation since the moment he had overheard her conversation with Lauren, revealing her true intentions. Brandon parked in the garage, entered their home, and methodically prepared for Marissa's arrival. He changed from his work clothes into casual pants and a sweater comfortable but still put together. He poured himself a glass of water, declining the temptation of alcohol. He needed full clarity for what was to come. Then he waited, seated in the living room with a book open on his lap, the very picture of a husband unaware that his world was about to explode. At 5:17 p.m., a car pulled into the driveway. Brandon heard the sound of the car, doors slamming with more force than necessary, followed by hurried footsteps on the front walk. The key turned in the lock with a jarring twist, and then Marissa burst through the door, still wearing her travel clothes, her face flushed with anger. "What have you done?" she demanded without preamble, dropping her purse and keys on the entry table with a clatter. Brandon looked up from his book, his expression calm. "Hello, Marissa. How is Boston?" "Cut the crap, Brandon," she snapped, stalking into the living room. "I just spent the entire flight on the phone with HR and legal. I've been temporarily removed from my position pending an investigation into ethical concerns. Somehow, they know about accounts that no one should know about. Accounts only you could have found." Brandon closed his book and set it aside, his movements deliberate, unhurried. "That sounds serious. What kind of accounts are we talking about?" "You know exactly what accounts," Marissa hissed, her composure cracking. "My personal accounts. The ones I kept separate from our joint finances." "Ah, Brandon nodded, as if just understanding. You mean the accounts where you've been hiding money while planning to divorce me after your promotion came through? Marissa froze, her anger momentarily displaced by shock. What are you talking about? Please, Marissa, Brandon said, rising to his feet with fluid grace. Let's not insult each other's intelligence. I know everything. You plan to leave me next month. Your relationship with Michael. Your intention to take half the accounts after securing your promotion. How? Marissa began, then stopped, realization dawning. You were there. When Lauren visited. You heard us talking in the kitchen. I was under the sink, Brandon confirmed, his voice level. Fixing the plumbing for our home. The home I've spent years improving while you were planning your exit strategy. Marissa's professional mask slipped back into place, her moment of shock controlled. Fine. So that doesn't explain why you went nuclear on my career. Do you have any idea what you've done? The board is questioning every decision I've made for the past year. Actions have consequences, Marissa, Brandon replied, unmoved by her anger. You made a series of choices to betray our marriage, to conceal finances, to plan a calculated exit designed to maximize your gain and minimize mine. Those choices have consequences. This is about more than our marriage, Marissa argued, her voice rising. This is my career, my reputation in the industry. Yes, Brandon agreed, a cold edge entering his voice for the first time. Just as your plans were about more than our marriage. They were about my financial future, my home, my life. Marissa paced the living room, running her hands through her hair in a rare display of agitation. This is insane. You've gone too far, Brandon. Way too far. Have I? Brandon asked quietly. I don't think I've gone far enough yet. Marissa stopped pacing, something in his tone catching her attention. What does that mean? It means, Brandon said, moving to the dining table where his laptop sat closed, that your career concerns are just the beginning of your problems. He opened the laptop and typed in his password, then turned the screen to face Marissa. On display was a banking app showing their joint accounts nearly empty. What have you done? Marissa whispered, the color draining from her face. I've secured our assets, Brandon replied simply. Most of them, anyway. There's still about 10% in the joint account, approximately the same percentage you were planning to leave me with after your calculated departure. Marissa stepped forward, grabbing the laptop and navigating frantically through their various accounts. Each showed the same story: transfers to accounts she couldn't access, minimal balances remaining. This is illegal, she said, looking up from the screen, her eyes wide with disbelief. These are joint assets. You can't just take them. Actually, I can, Brandon corrected her. At least temporarily. They can be recovered through legal proceedings. Of course, the same proceedings you were planning to initiate next month after blindsiding me with divorce papers. You'll never get away with this, Marissa warned, her professional negotiator's voice returning. My attorneys will destroy you. Your attorneys, Brandon repeated with a small smile. The ones in Boston? The ones you consulted while pretending to be on a business trip? Those attorneys will indeed have their work cut out for them, especially once they see the evidence I've compiled. He tapped a key on the laptop, bringing up a folder labeled with Marissa's name. Inside were subfolders organized by category: financial records, text messages, photographs, audio recordings. You've been spying on me? Marissa asked, incredulous. I've been protecting myself, Brandon corrected her. Something I learned in the Marines: when under attack, gather intelligence, secure your position, and prepare a counteroffensive. We're not in a war zone, Brandon. We're in a marriage. A marriage you were planning to exit with half of everything we've built together, Brandon reminded her. A marriage you've been using as cover while developing your relationship with Michael. Marissa's eyes narrowed at the mention of Michael. Leave him out of this. I'm afraid that's not possible, Brandon said, clicking on the photograph subfolder. Images appeared on screen: Marissa and Michael together, entering his condo, embracing in his car, holding hands across restaurant tables. Michael is very much a part of this story. These photos, Marissa began, shock giving way to renewed anger. You hired someone to follow me? To photograph me? This is harassment, Brandon. This is insane behavior. Is it? Brandon asked, his voice still calm. Is it any more insane than plotting to leave your husband of 10 years, timing your exit to maximize your financial gain, while sleeping with a colleague behind his back? Marissa stepped away from the laptop, running her hands through her hair again. I can't believe this is happening, she muttered. That's the thing about betrayal, Marissa, Brandon said, closing the laptop. No one expects it until it's too late. Marissa took a deep breath, visibly struggling to regain her composure. When she spoke again, her voice was controlled, her demeanor professional, the executive negotiator returning to the table. Okay, Brandon, you made your point. You're angry, you're hurt, I understand that. But this, she gestured to the laptop, this scorched earth approach isn't going to help either of us. Let's talk about this like rational adults. Brandon regarded her with a cool detachment that unnerved her more than anger would have. There's nothing to talk about, Marissa. You made your decision when you decided to betray our marriage. I've simply ensured that decision will have consequences you didn't anticipate. So what happens now? Marissa demanded, frustration evident in her voice. We destroy each other in court? Waste years in litigation? Is that what you want? What I want, Brandon replied, his voice finally revealing a hint of the anger he had kept contained, is justice. What I want is for you to experience the same shock, the same betrayal, the same helplessness you were planning to inflict on me. He stood, moving to a closet near the front door. From it, he retrieved a suitcase, one of Marissa's expensive sets, packed and ready. What is this? Marissa asked, eyeing the suitcase with growing alarm. This, Brandon said, wheeling the suitcase to where she stood, is your exit. Packed with the essentials you'll need until you can access your separate accounts, the ones you thought I didn't know about. You're kicking me out? This is my home too, Brandon. You can't legally. I'm not forcing you to leave, Brandon interrupted, his tone reasonable. I'm giving you the opportunity to stop living a lie. You don't want to be here. You don't want to be married to me. You've made that abundantly clear through your actions. He extended the handle of the suitcase, offering it to her. You're free to go now. To Michael, to a hotel, to your sisters, wherever you plan to go when you left me next month. Marissa stared at the suitcase, then at Brandon, disbelief written across her features. This isn't happening, she said, more to herself than to him. This isn't how this was supposed to go. No, Brandon agreed quietly. It wasn't. You were supposed to blindside me after securing your promotion. You were supposed to walk away with half of everything while I was left reeling from the betrayal. That was your plan, wasn't it? Tears welled in Marissa's eyes, whether from anger, frustration, or genuine emotion. Brandon couldn't tell. Probably all three. It wasn't like that, she insisted, her voice catching. It wasn't so calculated. Save it, Brandon said, his tone hardening. I heard you with Lauren. No way. I need to secure my promotion first, then take half the accounts. Your exact words, Marissa. There's nothing ambiguous about them. A tear slipped down Marissa's cheek, leaving a trail through her perfect makeup. What about the last 10 years? Do they mean nothing to you? The question hit Brandon like a physical blow, so breathtaking in its hypocrisy that for a moment he couldn't speak. When he found his voice, it was low and intense. They meant everything to me, Marissa, everything. I built my life around you. I left the Marines earlier than planned because you wanted stability. I chose architecture over engineering because it would keep us in Chicago for your career. I renovated this house room by room with my own hands because I thought we were building a life together. He stepped closer to her, his eyes locked with hers. So don't ask me if the last 10 years meant nothing to me. Ask yourself what they meant to you. Ask yourself when you decided that our marriage, our life together, was something you could discard when a better opportunity came along. Marissa looked away, unable to hold his gaze. It wasn't that simple. It never is, Brandon agreed, his anger receding, replaced by a profound weariness. But here we are anyway. He gestured to the suitcase, still standing between them. You're free to leave now, or stay and fight me through the courts. Either way, things have changed. The power balance has shifted. You no longer control how this ends. Marissa stood frozen, staring at the suitcase as if it might explode. The reality of her situation was finally sinking in, her career in jeopardy, her access to their joint finances cut off, her carefully constructed exit strategy in ruins. "I need to think," she said finally, stepping back from the suitcase. "I need time to process all this." Brandon shook his head. "There's nothing to process, Marissa. Your plans have been exposed. Your position has been compromised. Now you face the consequences." "Consequences?" Marissa repeated, anger flashing through her tears. "You talk about consequences as if you're some kind of judge. You're just a man, Brandon. A man whose pride was hurt." "This isn't about pride," Brandon replied evenly. "This is about justice. About facing the results of your own actions." "Justice," Marissa scoffed, wiping away tears with an angry gesture. "What you've done isn't justice. It's revenge. Pure and simple. Call it what you want," Brandon said with a slight shrug. "The outcome remains the same." Marissa turned away from him, moving to the window that overlooked their carefully landscaped backyard, another of Brandon's projects, another investment in a shared future that had been a lie. "I need to use my phone," she said after a long silence, her back still to him. "I need to make some calls." "Of course," Brandon nodded, though she couldn't see the gesture. "You're not a prisoner, Marissa. You're free to call whoever you need, Michael, your sister, your attorney. Just know that the situation won't change because of those calls." Marissa turned back to face him, her professional mask firmly in place despite the tear tracks on her cheeks. "You think you've won, don't you? You think you've beaten me in my own game." "This isn't a game," Brandon said, his voice hardening. "This is our life. The life you were willing to destroy for your own benefit. And what are you doing now?" Marissa challenged. "Aren't you destroying our life together with these actions?" "There is no our life anymore," Brandon replied quietly. "You ended that when you decided to leave me, when you began your relationship with Michael, when you started hiding money and planning your exit. I'm simply ensuring that the ending is written on my terms, not yours." Marissa stared at him, seeing something in his expression that seemed to finally convince her of his resolve. The fight visibly drained from her posture. "I need some privacy to make my calls," she said, her voice now practical, resigned. "Use the guest room," Brandon suggested, gesturing down the hallway. "I'll be here in the living room when you're done." Marissa nodded stiffly, then picked up her purse from where she had dropped it by the door. She walked to the guest room without another word, closing the door behind her with a quiet click that somehow conveyed more finality than a slam would have. Brandon returned to his seat in the living room, the confrontation having gone almost exactly as he had anticipated. Marissa had progressed through shock, anger, denial, attempted negotiation, and finally reluctant acceptance, the stages of grief for her collapsed plans. Now would come the practical phase. She would call Michael first, seeking comfort and reassurance. Then her sister for emotional support. Finally, her attorney in Boston, seeking professional advice on how to salvage what she could from the situation. Brandon waited patiently, making no effort to eavesdrop on her conversations. He didn't need to hear the specifics. The outcomes were predictable enough. After nearly an hour, the guest room door opened, and Marissa emerged. Her face was composed, her eyes dry, but a new weariness hung about her shoulders. She had removed her suit jacket, and her silk blouse was slightly rumpled, small imperfections that spoke volumes about her mental state. "I'd like to access my clothes and personal items," she said without preamble. "I'll be staying with Lauren for a few days while I sort things out." Brandon nodded. "Of course. The suitcase I packed has immediate essentials, but you're welcome to gather whatever else you need." "How generous of you," Marissa replied, a flash of her earlier anger returning. "Allowing me access to my own possessions." Brandon didn't respond to the barb. He simply gestured toward their bedroom, indicating she was free to proceed. Marissa moved past him, her posture rigid, her movements controlled. Brandon remained in the living room, giving her space to collect her things without his supervision. It was a calculated risk. She might attempt to take valuables beyond personal items, but he doubted she would be so reckless given his obvious preparations. 20 minutes later, Marissa emerged from the bedroom with another suitcase and a garment bag. She had changed into more comfortable clothes, designer jeans, and a cashmere sweater, still elegant, but better suited for her uncertain situation. "I'll need to come back for the rest of my things," she said, her tone businesslike. Once I've established more permanent arrangements, that can be arranged through our attorneys, Brandon replied, matching her practical tone. Just let me know when you'd like to schedule it. Marissa nodded stiffly, then looked around the living room as if seeing it for the last time. Her gaze lingered on the photographs on the mantel of their wedding, vacations together, moments from a shared past that now seemed to belong to different people. Was any of it real? She asked suddenly, her voice softer than it had been since her arrival. These last 10 years, was it all just an arrangement to you? Brandon considered the question, understanding its importance despite its irony coming from her lips. It was real to me, he said finally, every day of it, until I heard you planning to leave. Marissa nodded slowly, accepting his answer without challenging it. I never meant to hurt you, Brandon. Whatever you might think now, that was never my intention. Intentions are irrelevant, Brandon replied, his military training showing in his pragmatic outlook. Actions are what matter. Your actions showed your true priorities, regardless of what you intended. And your actions now? Marissa asked, gesturing to the suitcases by the door. What do they show about your priorities? They show that I value justice, Brandon said simply. That I won't be a victim. That actions have consequences. Marissa smiled sadly, shaking her head. No, Brandon. They show that you don't forgive. That you'd rather destroy everything than risk being hurt again. Brandon's expression hardened. You're right about one thing, Marissa. I don't forgive. Not betrayal. Not deception. Not the calculated destruction of everything we built together. He moved to the front door and opened it, a clear indication that their conversation was over. Your sister is expecting you? Marissa nodded, gathering her purse and phone. She's on her way to pick me up. Should be here any minute. Then we're done here, Brandon said, his voice flat. Our attorneys can handle the rest. Marissa moved to the door, then paused, turning back to face him one last time. For what it's worth, Brandon, I did love you. For most of our marriage, I loved you very much. Brandon met her gaze steadily. If that's true, it only makes your betrayal worse. Marissa flinched at his words, then turned away, unable to maintain eye contact. She picked up her suitcases and stepped through the doorway without another word. Brandon watched from the threshold as she placed her luggage on the front walk, then stood waiting for her sister's car to appear. The evening light cast long shadows across the lawn, the suburban street quiet except for the distant sound of a neighbor's lawnmower. A car turned onto their street Lauren sedan. It pulled up to the curb, and Lauren emerged, rushing to embrace her sister. The two women spoke briefly, Lauren casting a dark look toward Brandon, still standing in the doorway. Then they loaded Marissa's luggage into the trunk and got into the C.A.R. As the sedan pulled away from the curb, Brandon remained motionless, watching until it disappeared around the corner. Only then did he step back into the house, closing the door quietly behind him. The house felt different, already emptier, yet somehow less suffocating. Brandon moved through the rooms slowly, adjusting to the new reality of his solitude. In the kitchen, he poured himself a glass of whiskey, then carried it to the back patio. The garden was peaceful in the fading light, the flowers and shrubs he had planted casting long shadows across the lawn. Brandon sat in one of the Adirondack chairs he had built himself, sipping his whiskey, letting the events of the day settle in his mind. Marissa was gone. Her carefully constructed plans were in ruins. Her career was in jeopardy. Her relationship with Michael would now face scrutiny it wasn't prepared for. Her financial security, at least a portion tied to their marriage, had been systematically dismantled. Brandon had won. But victory tasted different than he had expected, not sweet, not bitter, just final. His phone buzzed with a text from his attorney. M contacted my office, requesting meeting tomorrow to discuss settlement options. Settlement options. So Marissa had decided to negotiate rather than fight. A pragmatic choice, given her compromised position, but still surprising given her earlier defiance. Brandon texted back, confirm meeting. No concessions until full financial disclosure from her side. The attorney's response came quickly. Understood. Will advise caution and patience. Brandon put the phone away and returned to his whiskey, watching as the last light faded from the garden. Caution and patience, two qualities that had served him well in this conflict. Two qualities Marissa had underestimated in her husband. The night enveloped the garden in darkness, broken only by the soft landscape lighting Brandon had installed the previous summer. Another improvement to a home he had believed they would share for decades to come. Another investment in a future that no longer existed. Brandon finished his whiskey and returned to the house, closing and locking the patio door behind him. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, negotiations, legal maneuvers, the first steps toward dissolving the marriage Marissa had already abandoned in all but name. But tonight, in the quiet of the house that was now truly his, Brandon allowed himself to acknowledge what he had been suppressing throughout the confrontation with Marissa, a profound sense of loss. Not for the marriage, as it had been at the end, a hollow shell hiding her deception, but for what it had been at its best. For the decade of shared dreams, shared struggles, shared triumphs. For the love he had believed was real. Brandon moved through the silent house, turning off lights as he went, finally reaching their bedroom. He hesitated at the threshold, then entered, noticing immediately the gaps in the closet where Marissa's clothes had been, the empty spaces on her nightstand where her books and reading glasses had SAT. IT was no longer their bedroom. It was his alone. Brandon prepared for bed with military efficiency, his movements automatic, his mind already turning to the days ahead. He would need to remain focused, strategic. The battle with Marissa was not yet over. The legal complexities of divorce would require continued vigilance. But the decisive blow had been struck. Marissa had left the house defeated, her plans in tatters, her future uncertain. Brandon had ensured that she would not walk away with half of everything, that she would not enjoy the clean, advantageous exit she had planned. As he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Brandon felt the tension of the past weeks, the rage, the betrayal, the cold calculation begin to loosen its grip on his chest. In its place came a different feeling, finality. The recognition that a chapter of his life had closed irrevocably. Sleep came eventually, deep and dreamless. The sleep of a man who had faced his enemy and prevailed. The sleep of a man who knew, with absolute certainty, that he would never again be blindsided by betrayal. The next morning dawned bright and crisp, sunlight streaming through the bedroom windows. Brandon woke early, as was his habit, momentarily disoriented by the emptiness on Marissa's side of the bed. Then memory returned, bringing with it a strange mix of satisfaction and hollowness. He rose, showered, and dressed with his usual efficiency, then made coffee, just 1 cup now, not 2. The morning routine was both familiar and altered, the absence of Marissa's presence creating a new rhythm to the house. That Brandon's phone buzzed with a text from his attorney. Meeting confirmed for 10 a.m. And bringing counsel from Boston firm. Recommend business attire, professional demeanor. Brandon texted back his acknowledgement, then prepared breakfast, simple, practical, enough to sustain him through what promised to be a challenging meeting. As he ate, he reviewed his mental checklist of assets, accounts, and evidence, ensuring he was fully prepared for whatever strategy Marissa and her attorney might employ. At precisely 9:15, Brandon left the house, driving downtown to his attorney's office in a historic building overlooking the Chicago River. He arrived early, using the extra time to compose himself, to reinforce the emotional armor he would need for the confrontation ahead. The conference room was tastefully appointed, with a long mahogany table, comfortable leather chairs, and floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. Brandon sat at one end of the table, his attorney beside him, facing the door through which Marissa would enter. At 10 o'clock sharp, the door opened, and Marissa walked in, followed by a distinguished-looking woman in her 50s, clearly the Boston attorney. Marissa wore a navy blue suit, her hair perfectly styled, her makeup concealing any evidence of the previous day's emotional turmoil. The professional mask was firmly in place, but Brandon could see the strain around her eyes, the slight tension in her movements. Introductions were made, pleasantries exchanged with formal politeness. Then Marissa's attorney, Andrea Harmon, opened a leather portfolio and got straight to business. "Mr. Calloway, she began, her Boston accent subtle but detectable. My client has asked me to convey that she's interested in an expedited, equitable resolution to this situation. Brandon's attorney, James Richardson, nodded. My client is also interested in resolution, provided it truly is equitable, which would require full financial disclosure from both parties. Harmon smiled thinly. Of course, we're prepared to provide complete documentation of my client's assets, with the understanding that Mr. Calloway will do the same, including the accounts to which he recently transferred joint funds. Absolutely, Richardson agreed. Though I should note that those transfers were made in response to Mrs. Calloway's own unauthorized movement of funds to hidden accounts, as well as her explicitly stated intention to, and I quote, take half the accounts after securing her promotion. Marissa tensed visibly at the reference to her conversation with Lauren, but remained silent, letting her attorney speak for her. Let's focus on moving forward, Harmon suggested, her tone conciliatory. My client is proposing a clean division of assets 50-50 as a standard in Illinois with an expedited timeline to minimize disruption to both parties' lives. Brandon leaned forward slightly. A 50-50 division would only be equitable if all assets were on the table, including the funds Mrs. Calloway has been diverting to private accounts for the past 6 months. Marissa's eyes narrowed, but she maintained her composure. Those accounts contain my personal savings from my salary, she said, her first words since entering the room. Money I earned. Money earned during our marriage, Brandon corrected her. In a position you obtained while I supported your career advancement, often at the expense of my own opportunities. I think we're getting ahead of ourselves, Richardson interjected smoothly. Before discussing specific division of assets, we should establish a complete inventory of what those assets are. Harmon nodded agreement. A reasonable approach. We can exchange financial disclosures by the end of the week. The meeting continued in this vein for nearly 2 hours. Formal, professional negotiations about the dissolution of 10 years of marriage, reduced to assets, accounts, and property values. Throughout, Brandon maintained his composure, speaking only when necessary, letting Richardson handle the legal maneuvering. Marissa was similarly restrained, though Brandon could see the cost of that restraint in the tightness of her jaw, the occasional flex of her fingers against the conference table. This was not how she had planned for things to unfold. Yes, the meeting drew to a close, tentative agreements in place for the exchange of financial information and a follow-up meeting the following week. Harmon gathered her papers and excused herself to take a phone call, leaving Marissa alone with Brandon and Richardson. Richardson, sensing the tension, also stood. I'll give you two a moment, he said diplomatically, exiting the conference room and closing the door behind him. For the first time since she had left the house, Brandon and Marissa were alone together. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Marissa spoke, her voice quieter than it had been during the negotiations. My director called this morning. The internal investigation has been expanded to include all my client accounts for the past 3 years. Brandon said nothing, waiting for her to continue. My professional reputation is being systematically destroyed, Marissa went on, a tremor entering her voice despite her evident effort to control it. 10 years of building a career, of perfect performance reviews, of client trust, all of it under scrutiny now because of what you did. Because of what I did, Brandon repeated, his tone level. Or because of what you did, the accounts you hid, the ethical boundaries you crossed, the trust you betrayed, both mine and your firm's. Marissa looked away, staring out the window at the Chicago skyline. You could have handled this differently. You could have confronted me directly when you overheard my conversation with Lauren. We could have discussed divorce like civilized people, like you were planning to discuss it with me. Brandon asked, after securing your promotion, after preparing your exit strategy, after taking half of everything we built together. Marissa turned back to face him, her professional mask slipping to reveal genuine pain beneath. Is this really what you wanted, Brandon? To destroy everything, my career, our marriage, any chance of an amicable separation? Brandon met her gaze steadily. What I wanted was a wife who honored her vows, who respected our marriage enough to be honest about her feelings, her intentions. who would have had the courage to confront problems directly instead of plotting a calculated exit. And because you didn't get that, you decided to burn everything to the ground, Marissa said, bitterness evident in her voice. No, Brandon corrected her. I decided to ensure that actions have consequences. That betrayal comes with a cost. That you don't get to dictate the terms of our separation after planning to blindside me. Marissa shook her head slowly, a sad smile touching her lips. You know what the irony is, Brandon? I convinced myself that leaving was the right decision because we had grown apart, because we wanted different things from life. But I was wrong. She gestured between them, encompassing the conference room, the legal proceedings, the calculated dismantling of their shared life. This what you've done, how you've responded, it proves we're exactly alike. Both willing to do whatever it takes to win. Both able to set emotion aside and execute a strategy with ruthless precision. Brandon considered her words, recognizing the truth in them despite himself. The difference, he said finally, is that I never betrayed you. I never planned to leave you without warning. I never used our marriage as a convenient cover while building a relationship with someone else. No, Marissa acknowledged. You just methodically destroyed my career and financial security when you discovered I was unhappy. Much more honorable. Before Brandon could respond, the conference room door opened, and Harmon returned, followed by Richardson. The moment of private confrontation was over, replaced once again by the formal structure of legal negotiation. The meeting concluded shortly thereafter, with agreements in place for next steps and a tentative timeline for the divorce proceedings. Marissa and her attorney left first. Marissa walking out without a backward glance, her posture perfect, her stride confident despite everything. Brandon watched her go, aware that something final had passed between them in those private moments, not reconciliation or forgiveness, but a recognition of what they had become to each other. Opponents, strategists, people willing to inflict damage to protect their interests. That went better than expected, Richardson commented as they gathered their materials. Her attorney is clearly pushing for a quick resolution. They're in a weaker position and they know it. Brandon nodded absently, his mind still on Marissa's parting words. What happens next? Financial disclosures by Friday. Then we meet again next week to discuss specific terms, Richardson explained. Given the circumstances, I think we can expect a favorable settlement. Mrs. Calloway has strong incentive to resolve this quickly and quietly, especially with her professional situation in flux. Her career, Brandon said, more to himself than to Richardson. The investigation at Meridian. Richardson nodded. A significant point of leverage for us. The more protracted and public these proceedings become, the more damage to her professional reputation. Brandon considered this, weighing the strategic advantage against the magnitude of what he had already set in motion. I don't want to completely destroy her career, he said finally. That wasn't the objective. Richardson looked at him with mild surprise. A moment of mercy, Mr. Calloway? After everything she planned to do to you. Not mercy, Brandon clarified. Proportion. She betrayed our marriage, planned to take half our assets, and was willing to blindside me with divorce. Those actions deserve consequences. But completely destroying her professional future goes beyond those consequences. Richardson studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. I understand. What would you like me to do? Contact Meridian's general counsel, Brandon instructed. Make it clear that my issue was with my wife's personal financial conduct, not her professional activities. I have no reason to believe she mishandled client accounts or violated firm protocols. That could reduce our leverage in the settlement negotiations, Richardson warned. I'm aware, Brandon acknowledged. But this isn't about extracting the maximum possible damage. It's about ensuring fair consequences for specific actions. Richardson made a note in his portfolio. Very well. I'll make the call this afternoon. As they left the conference room, Brandon felt a weight lift from his shoulders, not the burden of the divorce proceedings still ahead, but the weight of unexamined vengeance. He had achieved his primary objective. Marissa would not blindside him, would not walk away with half of everything on her terms, would not execute her calculated exit strategy as planned. The rest, her long-term career prospects, her relationship with Michael, her financial future beyond their divorce was not his concern. Justice had limits. Consequences should be proportional to the offense. Outside the office building, the October sun was bright but cool, the Chicago streets bustling with midday activity. Brandon paused on the steps, looking up at the clear blue sky, feeling a sense of clarity that had been absent in the weeks since discovering Marissa's betrayal. That he had won, not by destroying Marissa completely, but by ensuring she could not win on her terms. By taking control of a situation she had planned to control. By refusing to be a victim of her calculated exit. That evening, alone in the house that was now truly his, Brandon sat in his home office, reviewing the financial documents his attorney had prepared for the disclosure process. Each account, each asset, each investment represented a piece of a life he and Marissa had built together over a decade of marriage, but a marriage that was now ending. Not with the blindsiding blow Marissa had planned, but with the controlled, strategic dissolution Brandon had engineered. His phone buzzed with a text from Reynolds, the investigator. Final report prepared as requested. Contains all documentation gathered during surveillance. Available for pickup tomorrow. Brandon texted back his acknowledgement, then set the phone aside. The investigation was complete. The evidence collected. The strategic advantage secured, he leaned back in his chair, gazing at the framed architectural degrees on his wall, achievements earned while supporting Marissa's career, accommodating her priorities, building what he had believed was a shared future, but a future that no longer existed. A shared life now divided into assets and liabilities, schedules and settlements, the cold, calculated terms of divorce. Brandon closed the financial folders and stood, moving to the window that overlooked the backyard garden. In the darkness, the landscape lighting he had installed illuminated the flower beds, the stone pathways, the small pond with its gentle fountain, all created by his hands, all expressions of his belief in permanence, in building something meant to last. Impermanence. That was the lesson Marissa had taught him, though not in the way she had intended. Nothing was certain. No relationship was immune to betrayal. No future was guaranteed. Brandon watched the water flow from the fountain, catching the light in momentary sparkles before returning to the dark surface of the pond. Like moments of clarity in a life otherwise shrouded in partial truths and hidden intentions, he had won not by being better than Marissa, but by being more prepared, more strategic, more willing to act decisively when betrayal was discovered. He had ensured that she would not walk away with half of everything, that she would not execute her carefully planned exit on her terms. Justice of a sort. Not perfect, not complete, but sufficient. The house was silent around him, emptier without Marissa's presence, but somehow less suffocating. The oppressive weight of unspoken truths, of hidden agendas, of calculated deceptions had lifted, replaced by the clean, clear certainty of solitude. Brandon turned from the window and moved through the quiet house, turning off lights as he went. In the bedroom, his bedroom, now, he prepared for sleep with the same efficiency that had characterized his military service, his architectural career, his methodical dismantling of Marissa's plans. As he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling in the darkness, Brandon allowed himself to acknowledge the truth he had been avoiding throughout the confrontation with Marissa. Despite everything, despite the betrayal and the pain, despite the cold, calculated response he had engineered, part of him still remembered loving her, still remembered believing in their shared future, still remembered the man he had been before discovering her deception. That man was gone now, replaced by someone harder, more cautious, less willing to trust. Someone who had learned, through painful experience, that love was no protection against betrayal, that vows could be broken, that decade-long commitments could be discarded when convenient. Brandon closed his eyes, letting the weight of the day settle around him like a heavy blanket. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the continued legal proceedings, the financial disclosures, the negotiated terms of their separation. But the decisive battle had been fought and won. Marissa would not blindside him with divorce after securing her promotion. She would not walk away with half their assets on her terms. She would not execute her calculated exit strategy as planned. Instead, she stood in the wreckage of her carefully constructed plans, facing the consequences of her choices, experiencing the same shock and disorientation she had intended to inflict on him. As sleep finally claimed him, Brandon's last conscious thought was not of victory or vindication, but of a simple, undeniable truth. I don't forgive. I don't forget. Words spoken to Marissa as she left their home, defeated and diminished. Words that would define whatever life awaited him after the dissolution of their marriage. Words that would protect him from ever being blindsided by betrayal again. In the darkness of the bedroom they had once shared, Brandon Calloway slept the sleep of a man who had faced betrayal and emerged victorious, scarred, perhaps, changed certainly, but not destroyed. Not blindsided, not defeated. The house was silent around him, the emptiness not a void but a sanctuary. A space free from deception. A foundation for whatever future he would now build alone, that a future secured not by trust, which had proven fragile, but by vigilance, by strategic thinking, by the harder knowledge that in this world, even love must be defended against betrayal. Outside, the Chicago night enfolded the house in darkness, stars hidden behind clouds, the neighborhood quiet except for the occasional passing car. Inside, Brandon slept, a man transformed by betrayal and its aftermath. A man who had discovered, through painful experience, the limits of trust and the power of preparation that a man who didn't forgive. A man who didn't forget, that a man who had ensured that when betrayal came, it was not he who was left broken and defeated, but the one who had plotted against him. The silence of the house was not emptiness but completion, not absence but resolution. In that silence, in that resolution, Brandon found if not peace, then at least the cold satisfaction of justice served, of consequences delivered, of a reckoning that had been silent but absolute. The eyes clinked in Miles Trenton's glass as he took another sip of whiskey, his eyes scanning the crowd of well-dressed guests mingling in his living room. The party was in full swing, laughter and chatter filling the air, but Miles felt oddly detached from it all. His gaze settled on his wife, Lana, who was across the room, charming a group of guests with her radiant smile and animated gestures. Something was off. Miles couldn't quite put his finger on it, but the nagging feeling in his gut had been growing stronger over the past few weeks. Lana's late nights at the office, her hushed phone conversations, the growing emotional distance between them, it all added up to something he didn't want to face. Earth to Miles, a voice cut through his thoughts. You look like you're about to cross-examine that whiskey glass. Miles turned to see Vanessa Adler, his close friend and fellow lawyer, watching him with a raised eyebrow. He forced a smile, just thinking about work. Vanessa snorted. At your own party? Come on, Miles. What's really going on? Before he could answer, a tall, handsome man with salt and pepper hair approached Lana's group. Miles watched as Braden Huxley, the real estate mogul, inserted himself into the conversation with practiced ease. Lana's eyes lit up, and she laughed at something Braden said, touching his arm lightly. Miles' jaw clenched. He downed the rest of his whiskey in one gulp. I need some air, he muttered to Vanessa, setting down his glass and making his way to the patio. Outside, the cool night air helped clear his head. Miles took a deep breath, trying to push away the suspicions that were eating at him. He was a defense attorney, known for his sharp mind and ability to piece together evidence. But right now, he wished he could turn off that part of his brain. Mr. Trenton? A quiet voice interrupted his thoughts. Miles turned to see Connor Dade, his private investigator, standing in the shadows. Connor, Miles nodded. What have you got for me? Connor glanced around to make sure they were alone before speaking in a low voice. I've been tracking Mr. Huxley's movements, as you requested. He's been seen entering your home on multiple occasions while you were at work. Miles felt his stomach drop, but he kept his face impassive. How many times? At least 5 in the past 2 weeks, Connor replied. Always during your normal office hours. Miles nodded, his mind already racing. Keep digging. I want to know everything, where they go, what they do, who they talk to. Leave no stone unturned. Connor nodded and melted back into the shadows, leaving Miles alone with his thoughts. He stood there for a long moment, staring out at the manicured lawn, his hands gripping the patio railing so tightly his knuckles turned white. When he finally turned to go back inside, his face was a mask of calm. But inside, a storm was brewing. The party continued, but now Miles watched the room with new eyes. He noticed the subtle glances between Lana and Braden, the way they seemed to gravitate towards each other even when speaking to other people. Each observation was another nail in the coffin of his marriage. As the night wore on, Miles found himself at a table with several colleagues, including Vanessa. He was in the middle of a discussion about a recent high-profile case when Braden approached, a smug grin on his face. "Quite the party, Trenton," Braden said, his voice dripping with false camaraderie. "Your wife certainly knows how to entertain." Miles felt the tension in the air thicken. He looked up at Braden, his face betraying nothing of the rage building inside him. "She does indeed," he replied coolly. Braden leaned in, his voice low but clear enough for those at the table to hear. "Your wife will spend a night with me." The table fell silent. All eyes turned to Miles, waiting for his reaction. He could feel Vanessa tense beside him, ready to intervene if necessary. Miles met Braden's gaze, his voice ice-cold and deadly serious. "You have 30 seconds to leave, or I'll shoot you in the groin, and you'll never feel your dick again." The color drained from Braden's face. He straightened up, his bravado crumbling under Miles' unwavering stare. For a moment, it seemed he might challenge Miles, but self-preservation won out. With a muttered curse, Braden turned and left, pushing his way through the crowd towards the exit. The party quickly began to disperse after that, guests murmuring among themselves about what they had witnessed. Miles remained seated, calmly sipping his drink as if nothing had happened. Vanessa leaned in close. "Miles, what the hell was that about?" "Just taking out the trash," he replied, his voice devoid of emotion. As the last of the guests filed out, Miles found himself alone in the living room with Lana. She stood by the fireplace, wringing her hands nervously. "Miles, I can explain," she began, but he cut her off with a raised hand. "Save it, Lana. I know everything." Lana's face crumpled. "Please, Miles, it was a mistake. I never meant to." "To what?" Miles interrupted, his voice sharp. "To fuck another man in our bed? To lie to my face for weeks? To make a fool of me in front of our friends and colleagues?" Tears streamed down Lana's face. "I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. Please, can we talk about this? Can we try to work it out?" Miles studied her for a long moment, his face unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm and controlled. "You'll get exactly what you deserve, Lana. But don't think for a second that I'll forgive you." Fear crept into Lana's eyes as she realized the full weight of what she had done. What are you going to do?" Miles turned away from her, walking towards his study. "You'll see," he said over his shoulder, leaving Lana alone in the empty room. In his study, Miles poured himself another whiskey and lit a cigar. He sat in his leather chair, staring at the wall as he puffed on the cigar, his mind racing. Lana's betrayal wasn't something he could forgive, and he had no intention of letting her or Braden walk away unscathed. He picked up his phone and dialed Connor's number. "Connor," he said when the investigator answered, "I need you to dig deeper into Braden Huxley's life. Business dealings, financial records, personal relationships, everything. There's more to this than just the affair, and I intend to find out what it is." "Understood, Mr. Trenton," Connor replied. "I'll get right on it." Miles hung up and leaned back in his chair, blowing a plume of cigar smoke towards the ceiling. The wheels were already turning in his head, plans forming and taking shape. Lana and Braden had no idea what was coming for them. As the first rays of dawn began to peek through the study window, Miles stood and straightened his tie. He had work to do, and he would make damn sure that both Lana and Braden regretted the day they decided to cross him. Miles Trenton didn't believe in forgiveness. He believed in justice cold, calculated, and merciless, and he was about to show them exactly what that meant. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Miles Trenton's downtown office, casting long shadows across his desk. He sat back in his chair, fingers steepled, as he listened to the man across from him. "Braden Huxley is a snake," Zane Caldwell spat, his face twisted with disgust. "He's been undercutting my deals for years, but I've never been able to prove he's doing anything illegal. Miles leaned forward, his eyes sharp. And now? Zane grinned, sliding a thick folder across the desk. Now I got something. My inside source has been feeding me information for months. Cookbooks, bribed officials, the works. Miles flipped through the documents, his mind already racing with possibilities. He looked up at Zane. Who's your source? Tessa Monroe, Zane replied. Rising star in Braden's company. She's been itching to take him down from the inside. Miles nodded, a plan already forming. I'll need to speak with her directly. Set up a meeting, somewhere discreet. As Zane left, Miles picked up his phone. Connor, I need you to verify some information for me. And keep digging into Braden's personal life. I want to know every skeleton in his closet. The next day, Miles met Tessa Monroe in a quiet cafe on the outskirts of the city. She was younger than he expected, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Mr. Trenton, she said, shaking his hand firmly. I hope you understand the risk I'm taking by meeting you. Miles nodded, his voice low. I do, Ms. Monroe, and I assure you, it won't be in vain. Tell me everything you know about Braden's operations. For the next hour, Tessa laid out a complex web of fraud and embezzlement. Miles listened intently, occasionally asking for clarification. Why are you doing this? He asked finally. Why turn on Braden now? Tessa's eyes hardened. Because he's a predator. He uses people, discards them, and thinks he's untouchable. It's time someone showed him he's not. Miles smiled grimly. On that, Ms. Monroe, we are in complete agreement. Over the next few weeks, Miles worked tirelessly, building a case against Braden. He coordinated with Zane and Tessa, gathering evidence and lining up witnesses. All the while, he maintained a facade of normalcy at home with Lana. One evening, as they sat across from each other at the dinner table, Lana broached the subject they'd both been avoiding. Miles, she said hesitantly, I know things have been difficult between us, but I was hoping we could talk about moving forward, about reconciling. Miles looked at her, his face a mask of calm. Of course, Lana. I've been doing a lot of thinking, too. Hope flickered in Lana's eyes. You have? Miles nodded, taking a sip of his wine. I have, and I think we need to take things slow. Rebuild trust. Lana reached across the table, grasping his hand. Yes, absolutely. I'll do whatever it takes, Miles. I promise. As Lana squeezed his hand, Miles felt nothing but cold determination. He smiled, the expression not quite reaching his eyes. I'm glad to hear that, Lana. Very glad indeed. The next day, Miles put the next phase of his plan into motion. He called in favors, spread carefully crafted rumors, and made sure that whispers of Lana's affair reached the right ears. Within days, Lana's phone began ringing less frequently. Clients canceled appointments, citing vague excuses. Her social circle, once vibrant and active, began to shrink. I don't understand, Lana said one evening, frustration evident in her voice. It's like everyone's avoiding me. Even the Hendersons canceled their anniversary party booking. Miles feigned concern. That's strange. Maybe it's just a slow period. I'm sure things will pick up soon. But things didn't pick up. As the weeks passed, Lana's business continued to suffer. Miles watched as she grew more desperate, making frantic calls and sending pleading emails. One night, he overheard her on the phone with Braden. Please, Braden, she begged, her voice trembling. I need your help. My business is falling apart, and I don't know what to do. There was a pause, and then Lana's face crumpled. But I thought we had something special. As she hung up, sobbing, Miles retreated to his study. He poured himself a whiskey and allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. The pieces were falling into place. The next morning, Miles received a call from Connor. Mr. Trenton, Connor said, excitement evident in his voice. I've got something big. Braden's been embezzling funds from his own company. Millions of dollars, siphoned off into offshore accounts. Miles' grip tightened on the phone. Excellent work, Connor. Send me everything you've got. It's time to move. With the final piece of evidence in hand, Miles set his plan in motion. He filed a lawsuit against Braden Huxley on behalf of several former clients, alleging fraud and embezzlement. The day of the trial arrived, and the courtroom was packed. Miles stood before the judge, his voice clear and confident as he laid out the case against Braden. "Your Honor," he said, "the evidence will show that Mr. Huxley has engaged in a systematic pattern of fraud, deceiving not only his clients, but his own employees and business partners." As witness after witness took the stand, Braden's face grew increasingly pale. Tessa Monroe's testimony was particularly damning, providing insider details of Braden's illegal activities. During cross-examination, Miles went for the kill. "Mr. Huxley," he said, his voice deceptively calm, "can you explain the discrepancies in your company's financial records? Specifically, the millions of dollars that seem to have vanished into thin air?" Braden stuttered, sweat beading on his forehead. I don't know what you're talking about. This is all a misunderstanding." Miles approached the witness stand, holding up a stack of documents. "A misunderstanding? These bank records show transfers to offshore accounts in your name. Are you saying these are forgeries, Mr. Huxley?" The courtroom fell silent as Braden's lawyer frantically whispered in his ear. Finally, Braden slumped in defeat. "No," he mumbled. "They're not forgeries." As the judge ordered Braden's assets frozen, pending further investigation, Miles caught Zane's eye in the gallery. The businessman gave him a subtle nod of approval. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed around Miles. "Mr. Trenton," one called out, "how does it feel to bring down one of the city's most prominent businessmen?" Miles faced the cameras, his expression serious. "This isn't about bringing anyone down. It's about justice. No one is above the law, no matter how wealthy or well-connected they may be." As the reporters clamored for more, Miles spotted Lana standing at the edge of the crowd, her face a mask of shock and fear. He walked past her without a word, leaving her to face the consequences of her actions alone. That evening, Miles sat in his study, savoring a glass of scotch. His phone buzzed with a text from Connor. Braden tried to flee. Arrested at the airport. Miles allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. Phase 1 was complete. Braden Huxley was finished. But he wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. The next morning, Lana found divorce papers waiting for her on the kitchen table. Miles watched impassively as she read through them, her hands shaking. "Miles," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "Please don't do this. We can work this out. I'll do anything." Miles met her gaze, his eyes cold. "It's too late for that, Lana. You made your choice. Now you have to live with it." As Lana broke down sobbing, Miles walked out of the house, closing the door firmly behind him. He had a meeting with Zane to discuss the future of Braden's now-defunct company. The wheels of justice and revenge continued to turn, and Miles Trenton was the one controlling them. There would be no forgiveness, only consequences. The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawn of Braden Huxley's mansion. Yellow crime scene tape fluttered in the breeze as federal agents swarmed the property, boxes of evidence in their arms. Miles Trenton stood across the street, watching the scene unfold with cold satisfaction. His phone buzzed. It was Connor. "Mr. Trenton," Connor's voice crackled through the speaker. "Braden Huxley is in custody. They caught him at LAX trying to board a private jet to Mexico." Miles allowed himself a small smile. "Excellent work, Connor. Keep me posted on any developments." As he hung up, a black SUV pulled up beside him. The window rolled down, revealing Zane Caldwell's grim face. "Quite a spectacle," Zane remarked, nodding towards the mansion. Miles turned to face him. "Indeed. I trust everything is proceeding as planned on your end." Zane's lips curled into a predatory grin. "Oh yes. My team is already moving in to acquire what's left of Huxley's empire. By this time next week, it'll all be mine." "And Tessa Monroe?" Miles asked, raising an eyebrow. "Getting a well-deserved promotion," Zane replied. "She'll be heading up our new acquisitions department. A reward for her loyalty." Miles nodded approvingly. "Good. She took a significant risk. It's only fair she reaps the benefits." As Zane's car pulled away, Miles took one last look at the crumbling remains of Braden Huxley's life. Phase 2 was complete. Now it was time for the final act. Across town in a small, dingy apartment, Lana Trenton sat on a threadbare couch, staring blankly at the TV. The news was filled with reports of Braden's arrest and the collapse of his business empire. A knock at the door startled her. She opened it to find a courier holding an envelope. "Lana Trenton?" the courier asked. She nodded, taking the envelope with trembling hands. As soon as the door closed, she tore it open. Inside were divorce papers, every line already filled out in Miles' precise handwriting. All that was missing was her signature. Lana sank to the floor, tears streaming down her face. She reached for her phone, dialing Miles' number with shaking fingers. Miles answered on the third ring. "Yes. Miles, please," Lana sobbed. "Can we talk? Face to face? I know I made a terrible mistake, but I love you. We can work this out, can't we?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Finally, Miles spoke, his voice devoid of emotion. "All right. Meet me at Griffith Observatory in an hour." An hour later, Lana stood at the observatory's railing, looking out over the sprawling city of Los Angeles. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Miles approaching, his face impassive. "Miles," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for coming." He stood beside her, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "You wanted to talk. So talk." Lana took a deep breath. "I know what I did was unforgivable. But Miles, we've been together for so long. We build a life together. Can't we try to salvage something from this?" Miles turned to face her, his eyes cold. "Salvage what, Lana? The trust you shattered? The vows you broke? Tell me, what exactly is left to save?" "Our love," Lana pleaded, reaching for his hand. Miles pulled away. "Love," he scoffed. "Love doesn't betray. Love doesn't lie. What you're feeling now, Lana, isn't love. It's fear. Fear of facing the consequences of your actions." Lana's face crumpled. "Miles, please. I'll do anything. Just tell me what I can do to make this right." Miles stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a pen. "You want to make this right?" he said, holding out the pen. "Sign the divorce papers. Walk away. That's the only thing you can do now." Lana stared at the pen, then back at Miles' face, searching for any sign of the man she once knew. Finding none, she slowly took the pen from his hand. "Is this really what you want?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Miles' reply was swift and final. "It's what you chose, Lana. The moment you decided to betray everything we built together." With a shaking hand, Lana signed the papers. As she handed them back to Miles, a part of her still hoped for a last-minute reprieve, a sign that all was not lost. But Miles simply tucked the papers back into his jacket. "Goodbye, Lana," he said, turning to walk away. "Miles!" Lana called out, desperation in her voice. "Will you ever forgive me?" Miles paused, looking back over his shoulder. "Some things, Lana, are unforgivable. This is one of them." And with that, he walked away, leaving Lana alone with the consequences of her actions. The next morning, Miles sat in his new office, now a partner in Zane Caldwell's expanding business empire. He looked out over the city, a city that had seen the rise and fall of Braden Huxley, the unraveling of his own marriage, and the execution of a plan months in the making. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Vanessa. "Hey," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "How are you holding up?" Miles gestured for her to come in. "I'm fine, Vanessa. Why wouldn't I be?" Vanessa sat across from him, concern etched on her face. "Miles, you just took down one of the city's most powerful men and divorced your wife of 15 years. It's okay to not be fine." Miles leaned back in his chair, his face a mask of calm. "What's done is done. Braden and Lana made their choices. I simply ensured they faced the consequences." "And you?" Vanessa pressed. "What consequences are you facing, Miles?" For a moment, a flicker of emotion crossed Miles' face, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "I faced my consequences the moment I discovered their betrayal," he said quietly. "Everything since then has been about justice." Vanessa nodded slowly. "Just don't lose yourself in this, Miles. Revenge has a way of hollowing a person out." Miles smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I appreciate your concern, Vanessa, but I know exactly who I am and what I'm doing." As Vanessa left, Miles turned back to the window. The sun was setting over Los Angeles, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. It was a new era, both for the city and for Miles Trenton. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Mr. Trenton, I have information you might find interesting regarding a certain judge who's been taking bribes." "Interested?" Miles stared at the message, a slow smile spreading across his face. He typed out a reply. "Always." He set the phone down and reached for a cigar. As he lit it, savoring the rich aroma, Miles reflected on the path that had led him here. The betrayal, the pain, the calculated execution of his revenge. He felt no regret, no remorse, only a sense of grim satisfaction. In this city of angels, Miles Trenton had become something else entirely. A force of reckoning, dispensing his own brand of justice. And he was just getting started. The sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the city into twilight. But for Miles, a new day was dawning. A day without forgiveness, without mercy. A day where every action had its consequence, and he would be the one to ensure they were paid in full. He picked up his phone again, dialing Connor's number. "Connor, I've got a new job for you. Let's meet." As he hung up, Miles took one last look at the darkening sky. In this game of power and retribution, he had emerged victorious, and he intended to stay that way, no matter the cost.